to folks that we will be recording this. You should see the little recording icon on the top left-hand side of your screen to make sure folks who aren't able to attend will be able to get this information also.
We have one person on the phone. So just a reminder how they can unmute themselves or raise their hand. *6 is the keys to mute and unmute yourself. That toggles it. And *9 will raise and lower your hand. And could the person on the phone ending in 251 identify themselves? Again, you would use *6 to do that. And we sent you an unmute request. And if not, that's okay.
I think I may have gotten, let me see here, a request that had that included, Jean. Let me see here. Oh, no, the deleted items aren't still in my folder. Okay, oh, I do have a bunch of last minute requests here though. So hold on, I'm gonna just real quick respond to these so we can make sure everybody who wants to can join in. Okay. I think we probably should get started then. Thank you again, everyone, for being here today. We're really pleased to have you in this very informal public outreach meeting to talk a little bit about a process we've been developing and we'll be looking to start to implement in the new fiscal year. So I'm Elizabeth Betancourt. I am spearheading the technical side of implementing the Tribal Beneficial Uses Designation project. And I'm going to just do a quick Zoom review for folks, even though I'm sure most of you have been on Zoom calls, if not all day, at least for the last year. So again, a reminder of how to raise and lower your hand on the app. You'll look down in the bar. On the lower edge that has, you can click on participants and then reactions and raise hand. That may be the old school way because for me right now, and maybe it's because I'm a host, there's just a raise hand button. So it should be, either way, it should be in the lower toolbar of your Zoom screen. And folks on the phone, Jean mentioned this, but just a reminder, and we will remind you again, but if you would like to raise or lower your hand, you can press *9. And to mute and unmute in the app, there's a microphone button, of course, and we will invite you to unmute if you have a question and raise your hand. And then on the phone, to mute and unmute, you will press *6. If there is background noise and the person is not able to mute themselves, I will be doing that, or Jean will be supporting me in doing that. We want to make sure that everybody can hear. And we don't have a lot of presenters today. It'll be mostly just me and Dr. Howard, but I will be giving occasional time checks to make sure that we are respectful of everybody's time because we do want to have plenty of time for questions. So you are today with us at the Central Valley Regional Water Board, where we are talking about tribal beneficial use designations. If you've worked with us for any length of time, you know we are one of 9 regional boards in the state of California. We do have the largest geographic region, which runs from Goose Lake way up in the Oregon-California border, all the way down through the Sacramento River watershed, into the San Joaquin River watershed, and we also include the Tulare Lake Basin at the very south end of our Central Valley. It's that entire region. And so the project that, or the process that we're talking about today does cover the entirety of the Central Valley region. So I mentioned I'm Elizabeth. I'm working with our Basin planning section on this project. Dr. Meredith Howard is, for me, to my left on the screen. Thank you for waving, Meredith. And she's the section chief for the Basin planning section. And I'd like to also introduce Adam Lapitz, who is our Assistant Executive Officer for this project. He's our executive sponsor. And Adam, if you wouldn't mind introducing Patrick and our 2 board members who are with us today, that would be great.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here today. We have, I believe, Patrick Palupa, our executive officer, and 2 board members online today. Our board chair, Dr. Carl Longley, and I believe we have also our board member, Mark Bradford, on the call today. So thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. Thank you very much, Adam, and looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction. I know when the State Water Board adopted the tribal beneficial uses and gave direction to the regional board to engage in this process that we're going through today, I don't think anybody was totally aware of what the ramifications would be, how the policy would shape up. And so I think these conversations are a really good way of advancing that, advancing our understanding of what the ramifications are within our region and how we can structure our regulatory processes to honor the direction of the State Water Board, and while also adapting those programs to the regional needs within the Central Valley. And I really want to thank Elizabeth for spearheading a lot of these efforts and being incredibly engaged. You know, we've heard these issues come up in the tribal summits that have been undertaken in this region, and looking forward to the discussion here today. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Patrick and Adam. And it's really quite an honor, and we're very grateful to have the time and participation of Chair Longley and Board Member Bradford. So thank you very much to all of you. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of an agenda review and review of the purpose of the meeting today, and then we will dive into content. So we'll start with a regulatory context of tribal beneficial uses, including a history of tribal beneficial uses and an overview of basin planning. It will be very brief, so I would encourage you, if you have questions that we don't have time for in this process about process or about our regulatory requirements, please do reach out. We want to make sure that this process is accessible to everyone who's interested in participating. From regulatory context, we'll go into the actual designation process proposal, which will include a review of a timeline that we think we'll be able to stick to and accomplish over the next 1.5 years or 2 years or so. And then we'll go into public comment. We hope to get to public comment around 3 o'clock, if not sooner. So a reminder too, that the purpose of our meeting today is outreach. This is not yet a project under CEQA, so this isn't actually a formal outreach meeting. That's why we're not taking attendance or being very strict about text or script. But this is an opportunity for us to hear from you and for you to give us your thoughts about the proposed process that we have put out there for tribal beneficial use designations in the region. We hope to receive feedback from you regarding how this proposed process would work for your organization, thoughts about other approaches that you think might work given the constraints that we will identify, and questions on why or how the process would work, any other input that you have. We are incredibly grateful to the organizations that have brought us to this point. Tribes themselves, as you'll hear in our context conversation, of course, were the impetus for the state board moving down this path. And so we're grateful to tribes, tribal members, staff, and leadership. Nonprofit advocacy organizations were instrumental in making sure this happens. I know that we have at least one of them with us today, the California Indian Environment Alliance, and others, of course, many others with a vision for a more equitable California. We held 2 tribal summits in March, which helped us to refine the process that you'll see here today. We are grateful for tribes' continued participation. I know there are a number of tribes here today as well, and we're grateful for your continued presence. So finally, I wanted to point out too that once this approach is finalized and approved, that's when we will begin the actual CEQA formal outreach, AB 52 consultation, as well as much more formal meetings. And I wanted to make sure that you all realize, in case there are latecomers, that the meeting is being recorded today, and we will make it available to anybody interested and who wants to either see this again or share it with folks who weren't able to be here. So with that, I am going to share my screen, I hope. And we will, yes, there it is. And we will dive into the regulatory context. Here we go. All right, so you should have on your screen right now a reflection of mine, which is our first slide of the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board public outreach meeting today.
We do see it.
Excellent, thank you so much, Jean. Kind of talking into the void here, so I appreciate that. All right, so TBU definitions, tribal beneficial use definitions, the development of them and some context. So TBU development started for the state board in 2012. And the tribes brought to the state board that the California Water Code describes beneficial uses, but none of them were inclusive of tribes or cultural values. And further, tribes stated a general lack of consideration for tribal input into these water quality decisions. In 2013, the State Water Board Chair at the time, Felicia Marcus, she acknowledged the importance of identifying and describing beneficial uses that are unique to California tribes. Part of this acknowledgement was a statewide overview, a survey of fish consumption. And actually, I think that the individual who spearheaded that project, Dr. Fraser Schilling, is also with us today. So thank you, Dr. Schilling, for your part in this. And the Water Board met with tribes at the time and took in suggested considerations and definitions for beneficial uses. The definitions were adopted by the State Board in 2017, and again, informed by the suggestions and workshopping that happened with tribes who were interested in participating in the process. 19 tribes and tribal organizations submitted letters of support at the time, and even more tribes, tribal members, tribal organizations attended the hearing to make statements of support. So if you want background on tribal beneficial uses, it's part of our ISWEB plan, and the link is there. And if you can't get it off our slides once we post them, please contact me and we'll make sure that you can get that information. And I'm sorry, ISWEB should be inland surface waters, estuaries, and bays. I don't know what the last E is, I forget that one. But anyway, it's a very large conglomerate of policies related to mercury, actually. Here's a slide with the definitions. We will show these again, but we thought you'd be interested early on in knowing what tribal beneficial uses were identified. Specifically, there are 2 that we will be focusing on as part of this process, and that is the tribal tradition and culture definition. That's for things like religious ceremonies, arts and crafts and engineering, and gathering of supplies or medical type supplies, as well as many other things, of course. And then tribal subsistence fishing, which is exactly what it says, which is subsistence fishing for sustenance of life. There is a subsistence fishing definition as well, and that is, of course, the same as tribal subsistence fishing, but for any community interested in that. While certainly this is important to our region, this process will be focusing on those 2 definitions which are specific to tribes in the near term. I shouldn't say to the detraction of the sub definition. We will be working with that at some point. But this particular process will focus on the tribal use. definitions. So we wanted to make sure that you had some regulatory and policy context. There's been a lot of focus on the rights and sovereignty of tribes over the last few years, and really a policy investment in the right to self-determination in ways that we really haven't seen in previous decades. So I wanted to point out Executive Order B 1011, which was Governor Brown's executive order mandating consultation between states and tribes for any matters affecting tribal communities. And then Executive Order N 1519, which was Newsom's executive order reaffirming Brown's executive order on consultation and government-to-government communication. And then Newsom followed that up with a statement of administration policy on Native American ancestral lands. So his administration's policy is not only emphasizing consultation, but actually action and seeking opportunities to support California Native American tribes, co-management and access to natural lands. And I wanted to point out too that the definition of natural lands includes waterways. And then finally, the TBU designations process requires a California Native American Indian tribe to confirm a tribal beneficial use designation prior to board adoption. That means we will not be designating tribal beneficial uses without a tribe actually acknowledging, confirming that cultural or tribal subsistence fishing designation exists. Those uses have to exist by tribes for us to make that designation. And I will ask now for Dr. Howard to go into our basin planning overview. Meredith?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth.
And I'll switch slides for you. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, can you go to the next slide? So very briefly, because I'm seeing the names on the phone, I know a lot of you are, work with us a lot and are kind of aware of this, but for any that aren't, the Central Valley really has two basin plans, the Sacramento River Basin and San Joaquin River Basin plan, and then the Tulare Lake Basin plan. And, the basin plans are basically a mechanism to implement both the federal and state water pollution laws. They identify beneficial uses of surface and groundwaters. They're used to determine water quality objectives needed to protect those identified uses, which includes implementation actions and monitoring and surveillance. So they're kind of the main mechanism we use in planning and are going to be very relevant to doing tribal beneficial use designations. Next slide. There we go. Okay. There's a lot of legal steps required for a basin plan amendment, which is what these will be. And as Elizabeth stated earlier, we haven't actually started this project yet. We're basically doing some scoping and trying to think through what this would be, what it would look like. So, our first kind of step is to do an AB 52 tribal consultation. After that, we do a public participation section through CEQA scoping meeting. And then generally at that point, you generally draft a staff report, which then gets peer reviewed, usually a science peer review. And then once that has been completed, there's a public review process where those documents are released publicly. There's comments that we receive. We usually write a response to those comments and we revise the draft staff report accordingly. And then we move into, a board adoption hearing. So while this is a pretty high level summary, I think those of you that work with us a lot know that this is a very high level summary, and each one of these bullet points can incorporate a substantial amount of work and time. So it's also not a quick process, and Elizabeth is going to show a timeline kind of towards the end after she goes through kind of the proposal, but these are kind of the highlights. And I would encourage you, we didn't want to take too much time today to have us talking at you all. We really wanted to hear from you all. So if you have more questions about this process, reach out to Elizabeth. We're happy to set up a meeting offline and go through things in a little bit more detail for anyone that wants more information about our process or about basin planning or, all of the above. So Elizabeth, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Meredith. All right, so we do have a few minutes now for questions on TBU context or basin planning. So I am going to stop sharing my screen so we can see hands if any exist. for the regulatory context or questions about the basin planning process generically. Thank you, Sherry. I see a question from Sherry Norris about a question about having tribal environmental staff be part of the science and peer review. This was a question that came up when we had our tribal summits as well. And the answer is that peer review has to happen by disinterested third parties. Meredith, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so the answer is sure, yes, they could be, but they cannot be involved in the process in any way. It's supposed to be a completely objective review, which means that if they're involved in the process, they can't turn around and review the report. If there's folks from other areas of the country that would fit the bill for that and have not been in any way directly part of the process, then sure, they could be on the scientific peer review, yes.
Great, thank you, Meredith. Sherry, I see that you had a question initially about including tribes in the planning process. We will get to that. So if there are any questions about the generic basin planning process or the history or policy context of the tribal beneficial use definitions development, let us know. And yeah, Sherry, if it's out of region tribal experts, give us their names. All right, not seeing any questions about process, so we will go into the next section, which is the proposed process. Okay. So again, I wanted to make sure that those of you who are unfamiliar with the definitions had access to them again. Of course, you can find them online as well. Again, it's tribal tradition and culture. We shorten that to just call it CUL. Tribal subsistence fishing is Tsub. So the statewide status of tribal beneficial uses. Region 1, so I mentioned earlier that the state board started their definitions development back in 2012. Before that, actually more than a decade before that, Region 1 developed and adopted tribal beneficial. That my internet connection is unstable, so like Bob suggested, I am going to turn off my camera if I can figure out how to do this in this context. And hopefully that's better. So let me know if you can't hear me, Jean, or can't hear me well.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
All right. So Region 1 developed their TBUs back in 2001 to 2003. They had a very different context, of course, than the rest of the state, and the definitions are slightly different as well. They have not done any additional work on TBU designation since that time, but they have been talking about what their next steps would be in adopting the statewide TBU definitions and doing those redesignations on their current waterways. Region 6 and 9 have added definitions to their basin plans. That is, generally speaking, the accepted first step in this process. Our region will expect to bring the TBU definitions to our board for adoption into our 2 basin plans sometime this calendar year. The definitions, though, have the CUL and Tsub have not yet been designated. No waterways have been designated yet in any region. There are some challenges that exist, of course, with this process. As Meredith mentioned, and as many of you know, the basin planning amendment process is pretty extensive, requires understanding and research and reading up to make sure that they're aware of the issues as well. So the TBUs are made up of 3 very distinct provisions. We talked about coal and Tsub and Tsub. The mercury objectives that go along with these, and these are relatively unique in that they do have mercury objectives that go along with the designation. They are significantly more protective than many of our 303D listed waterways will allow. It's a very protective mercury objective for good reason. This is, we're protecting waterways and resources that are consumed or touched regularly. And so we want to make sure that the water quality is of adequate quality to protect human health. State board definitions are only the first step. The regional boards need to determine how to designate water bodies for these definitions. We did not receive an instruction manual or any kind of information of how the state board wanted this to happen. So it is something that we need to think through on our own. And because Region 5 is the first region to be walking down this road, it is new. we are working through this in a brand new way. So hence the very interactive way that we're bringing this process forward for consideration and input from tribes and existing dischargers or other affected public members. There are significant legal requirements, of course, and workload for TBU designations. And there are really diverse tribal perspectives and capacities in Region 5. Those of you who are who don't work with tribes regularly, there are federally recognized tribes who often have more resources because of economic investment or Bureau of Indian Affairs resources. And there are tribes that are not federally recognized, which don't have. So we want to create a process by which all tribes are able to access it equally. We want to make sure they all, if they are interested, if the tribe and tribal members and tribal leadership are interested, we want them to be able to participate effectively. So these are just some of the challenges that we're dealing with in developing this process. So we do have some goals for the process, which include reaching out to and including as many tribal requests as possible. We want to minimize the amount of time necessary to designate waterways. We will be prioritizing early successes. You'll see that in the next few slides. And we want to maximize water board and tribal resources through an efficient process. So we have talked about various ways to meet these goals, and I will be presenting to you now the process that we think best meets these goals. So there's 2 parts. The first part that we're taking on is the coal designation, which is mediating the major challenges, which is mercury and potentially the evidentiary process by focusing on the provision that we think has the most flexibility, which is the coal provision. So the mercury, the protective water quality objectives can be met in higher quality waterways for coal. Those that are designated for municipal or contact recreation or cold water fisheries, and that are not on the 303D list for mercury. And then for the evidentiary process, there's no limitation for what evidence is required to make a designation request for coal. And so we can be really flexible and adaptive, I would say, in what tribes are requesting and what we expect to bring forward to our board to support a recommendation. And then we think that this will help us achieve success within a reasonable amount of time. I am definitely have a sunny outlook on this, perhaps because it's very early in my basin planning experience. But we are imagining that this will probably take 18 to 24 months for a coal designation. And that's from the start of the formal project from a CEQA perspective, which again, we anticipate being in July, August of this calendar year. And this will also help us to develop a template approach for designating in more complicated waterways. So waterways that have higher pollution burdens, that aren't listed for complementary beneficial uses, et cetera. All right, so here's a graphic that kind of shows what I just talked about. So high quality waterways, these are complementary beneficial uses. Of course, this is not an exclusive or exhaustive list, but municipal, contact recreation or Rec 1, and or cold water fishery designations would be complementary designations to a coal designation. And then of course, those that are not on the 303D list for mercury, and then that do have an existing TMDL. The coal designation and the Tsub designation will not overturn existing TMDLs. So that Venn diagram, that center there, will be what we're focused on for this initial designation process. And there are some examples here. The Upper Cosumnes, for those of you in the Central Sierra. Up here in the northern part of the Sierra Cascade, we have the McLeod and Upper Pitt, the Coastal Range, Clear Lake, and then the Upper Merced down in the Southern Sierra. So part 2 of our proposed approach addresses the Tsub designations. So we know that these will be more complicated because they require consumption surveys and water quality data. So at the same time that we're pursuing coal designations, we will work toward identifying data and information gaps for Tsub designation, such as, where have there been done consumption surveys? Do we need more information to do a Tsub designation? Or is there a request for a Tsub designation on a waterway that has not done a consumption survey? Support a designation, et cetera, questions like that. So this approach allows for near-term protection of waterways for the coal designation. Again, we'll be able to develop a template based on early success with coal designation for the Tsub process. And it'll allow us to prepare for more complicated designations through setting that foundation of information, data, and research. And of course, expectations are set as well with these first processes. And we would like to tackle something that we feel confident that we'll be able to do efficiently. So tribal outreach and involvement. I mentioned one of the challenges is the varying degrees of resources and capacity with tribes throughout our region. And we have actually more than 100 tribes in the Central Valley region, federally recognized and unrecognized tribes. So this is a very significant outreach effort to the tribes in the region. The tribes must, again, confirm the designation and must actually drive the evidentiary process. We don't have tribal information on specific tribes as a state agency. And so if a tribe wants a designation, they will need to provide the evidence that would support our recommendation to the board. This doesn't necessarily mean the supply of confidential information, certainly. We know that that exists, and we are being very careful to accommodate consideration of creating a process that doesn't require exposure of confidential information. But we do see more flexibility in this coal designation in the tribal participation in the evidentiary process. And we're addressing diverse tribal capacities through the development of and support for a tribal advisory committee. This might look like multiple tribal advisory committees based on input that we received in the 2 tribal summits last month. And we are doing multi-agency coordination to increase the number of tribes reached. That means we're reaching out via certainly ourselves in our own effort, but also through the state board, through the Department of Water Resources, and tribal coordinators throughout the state of California. And we are doing ongoing planning for outreach on an individual tribe basis, knowing that that might look really different based on what tribe we're reaching out to, based on the type of involvement they're interested in or the individuals that they put forward to lead their effort from their tribe. Outreach will look different depending on all of those considerations. And finally, we have an anticipated timeline. Please note the yellow text at the top there, subject to change. This is an anticipated timeline. The dates I'm sure of are the near-term dates, of course. We had initial discussions with tribes to get their input in 2020 and early 2021, so several months back. We had 2 tribal summits, as I mentioned last month, where we got some great input from tribes. And we obviously are having a public outreach meeting today to talk a little bit about just the general public's feedback on this process. And we anticipate having an information item with our board at their June board meeting. And that is June 17th and 18th. I can't say yet, I'm sorry what day it will be on, but we will send a notice out to all of the listservs that receive this notice as to when that information item will be showing up on our board's agenda, just in case it's something that you'd like to participate in. So we will revise the proposed process and finalize it with input throughout all of these conversations, and certainly the ongoing, one-to-one side conversations that we're having as well. We anticipate beginning the actual project, so again, in CEQA terms, beginning CEQA in July of this year. We anticipate some scoping meetings this summer, establishing the TAC, the Tribal Advisory Committee, sometime this summer, starting AB 52 tribal consultations. So we're anticipating kind of 2 rounds of tribal consultation. So one, theoretically, when the project starts, there is a deadline requirement for tribal consultation to begin when a project begins from a CEQA perspective. So we anticipate that happening early this fiscal year, again, July, August. And then once we have the actual waterways that will be recommended for designation, we will do another round of tribal consultation. Obviously, the tribes promoting the designation will be part of that process, but any tribe in a waterway that's affected will be part of that AB 52 tribal consultation process as well. And then, identification of water bodies for designations. We anticipate that happening in early 2022. So something like February, March, getting that list together. And then in this third box here, preparing the documents required for a basin plan amendment recommendation to our board. We'll be drafting the staff report that Meredith mentioned. In late spring of next year, doing peer review, spring, summer, public comments, and then anticipate a board adoption hearing sometime in autumn of 2022. So again, this is aggressive, a very positive, sunny outlook timeline. We'll see how it goes, but this is what we expect. We think we can do this. So we have gotten to the public comment period. So I'm going to stop sharing, turn my camera on, and let's see, it looks like there are some questions. Fraser, thank you for including that link in the comment box. So Karen, can you clarify, is the timeline that was displayed for the initial effort focused on coal? Yes, that's right. So that timeline, Karen, is focused on coal. We anticipate coal designations in autumn of 2022, but we will be beginning the Tsub process, information gaps, data gaps analysis, looking at similar processes as a complementary effort like COM designations. We will begin that at the same time as we're beginning the coal designation process. And, I have no idea how long that will take, but would anticipate Tsub designations maybe happening in 5-ish years. We'll see what that looks like. Certainly a better idea as time moves on. Fraser, I see your question about why not do Tsub at the same time. It really comes down to staffing and the technical support that is required for a Tsub designation. So we will be supporting sort of the gap analysis in the near term, but doing both of those things at the same time with a process that is so brand new just did not seem feasible to the staff size that we have right now. Okay, Sherry, I see it sounded like you will not be collecting designations for specific locations, but then in the second round, you're reviewing those. Okay, Sherry, you talking about putting up the timeline slide, maybe? I don't know where you are to unmute you, I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm looking for you, Sherry, to unmute you. I can't see you, but I'm going to put
I found her and I asked her to unmute.
Cool. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate you.
Hey, this is Sherry. Just to
Sherry.
yeah, so exactly. I was looking at your slide with the timelines, and I was trying to figure out when tribes should be, because they have internal work to do, right? To start to gather up those locations for it looks like you're doing call first.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of looking at when they should expect to be providing you with that, with those locations.
Right.
And if you don't have that yet, just like maybe in here, just sort of like gray answer.
Yeah, good question. So again, in my Pollyanna way, I have a great idea when I think that will happen. So when we begin our initial AB 52 consultations this July, August, tribes should be, if they're interested in this, please start collecting information, right? I don't think that the evidentiary process is going to require like archaeological analysis at all. That's not what we're going to be looking for. But if there are waterways that a tribe is interested in designating for coal, starting to get that information together, or at least talk about the process now, makes sense. When we start formal consultation, and really a tribe is welcome to reach out to us for a conversation with their council or whoever at any time. But the formal consultations, we anticipate July and August, and then tribes are welcome to ask really specific questions about what the process will look like. And we also anticipate, I've been calling it a submittal cover sheet. It's a document that I drafted just saying, what waterway, what are the, UTM coordinates, what are the general uses, just kind of to show us what waterway and what segment of it will be required or requested for designation. And we anticipate that being due, air quotes, to the water board towards like November, December of the end of this year. And then that's why I think we'll be ready to make a list of recommendations that we'll be working on a basin plan amendment for our board. I think we'll be able to do that in February, March, if we get the tribe's requests in November, December of this year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that last piece on what was going to be due in February, March, I was writing and it was fast.
Yeah, no worries. So I think we'll have a list of waterways that we'll be working on recommendation for listing, for coal listing. I think we'll have that list ready by February, March, if we can get the request support materials from tribes in November, December.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Other questions? You are welcome also to use the raise hand function, or again, is it Jean? Sorry, I always forget which one is which for star 9 to raise and lower your hand.
Correct.
Thank you. Let's see here, reading through questions. Okay, Craig, I see a question from you. Did you say that Tsub or coal designations would not supersede existing TMDLs? Yes. Confirming, Craig, your question that Tsub or coal designations will not supersede existing TMDLs. Now, that doesn't mean that the water board is prohibited from redoing a TMDL in the case that that is needed, and certainly we could see that possibly would be needed with a coal or Tsub designation, but also understanding how behind we are in the TMDL development process, I don't see that being a concern in the next decade or so. Matt Mitchell, a question about, Meredith, did you want to say something to that? Sorry.
No, keep going.
Okay. Matt, do you anticipate reaching out to tribes outside of Region 5 who may be interested in participating? This was a relevant issue with US EPA's experience with review of the Delta Methyl Mercury TMDL. Good question, Matt. We sent our initial outreach about the tribal summits out to all tribes in California, and our Office of Public Participation helped with that. We actually received a couple of responses saying that the tribe was not interested at all. Excuse me. They will still, of course, be on the list just to be alerted that things are happening. But yeah, definitely, we understand that there may be tribes who currently maybe don't even reside in California, right? Who have a historic and legacy interest in what happens to the landscape here in the Central Valley. So certainly we want to be sure that we are reaching as many tribes and tribal members as possible with this information. Part of our outreach also was to the RTOC, which is, of course, the federal EPA's Regional Tribal Outreach Committee, is it? Which is the federally recognized tribes of California and a few other Western states as well. So there's a lot of ways that we are doing outreach by which we're hoping to reach as many tribes as possible. All right, going down this list of questions, Fraser, following up on Sherry's question, it's not obvious what standards will be used to determine if coal is a use being practiced and leading to board action. This could slow down or prevent certain designations. Yeah, so like I said, Fraser, we are really, we are creating the wheel, so to speak. Maybe not quite that much down the chain, but this is a brand new process. So what we are anticipating being the very minimum required for a designation request is a letter from council, from tribal council, saying this is a use that occurs on this part of the waterway. We affirm that it happens, or in some cases that it's a historic use that we are trying to revive, right? Because that's okay too, to request a designation for that. And please, consider our request for designation. That's a pretty low bar, I would say, for the evidentiary process. And that's something that, we've talked about with our board members, the 2 board members who are here. And actually Chair Longley or board member Bradford, if you're interested in speaking to this, we'd be happy to have your input, but also understanding that you haven't received anything yet. And so it's kind of hard to know or anticipate what will be approved. But we have had extensive conversations with leadership at the Water Board about these things and don't anticipate the evidentiary process being a hurdle, an unsurmountable hurdle for any tribe interested in designation. Sherry, can you share the submittal cover sheet information you think you might be needed? Yeah, totally. I can absolutely share that. It's very much in draft form right now, Sherry, and we've been actually working with a tribe to kind of work through like what makes sense. But yeah, I'm happy to send it to you if you don't mind being maybe a sounding board, understanding that it's draft. And we can work through what improvements or changes might be needed to accommodate tribal needs and that still meet some of the requirements that we as a regulatory agency have for the process. Totally. Let's see. Fraser, why can't coal and TSUB be used to amend TMDL? Happens with other TMDLs with new information. Totally, Fraser. That totally can happen. It just is the case. And Adam, if you don't mind speaking to this, that would be appreciated. But because TMDLs take such a long time to develop, there was an obvious need in the development of this process that designation not immediately overturn an existing TMDL. Did you want to speak to that, Adam?
Sure. I think, the process that we have right now is we're going down the road to, and I think, Elizabeth, you put it in a good way. We're kind of inventing the wheel as we go along, and we need information. We need to understand what these, what are we going to be adding to our basin plan? What is happening? What are the beneficial uses entailing? What is it going to be? What types of water body uses are we looking at? We just don't have that information right now. And, a TMDL has gone through a lot of effort to look at things like, in some cases, fish consumption studies, in other cases, a lot of information on the sources, a lot of information on the achievability of the loads and things like that. And so to automatically just amend a TMDL based on this set of information we would need to go through a process to amend that TMDL by looking at all those things again. And certainly that can happen, just like Elizabeth had mentioned, but it will take a little bit, it'll take some more effort after we know initially what we're dealing with.
That's great. Thank you so much, Adam. Appreciate you being here. Okay, Diana, thinking about going into detail about what all of this looks like for tribes once they have a TBU designated. Diana, this actually is a little bit of good news, maybe. Nothing is required of tribes once a beneficial use is designated. What we will be looking at once coal or Tsub is designated is what we would need to develop water quality objectives, which is the next step after designation. So designation affirms use on a waterway, but it doesn't immediately put into place protections for those uses, other than, as I mentioned with these, the mercury protections, the mercury objectives. So if there are other things that are contaminated or risk or danger to the waterway and the people who use it, we would probably work very closely with the tribe to talk through what those contaminant risks might be and to look at existing water quality data to help in establishing those water quality objectives. But that is certainly not a requirement on tribes. There's no reporting that comes with this. Once it's designated, that's a beneficial use in California, and we're done until we get to the water quality objective development part. Stephanie, thank you. RTOC, Regional Tribal Operations Committee, thank you. Obviously, too many acronyms for me in this process. So Fraser, in 2015, tribes requested the state board provide standards and guidance for how tribes can deliver sufficient information for coal and Tsub. Seems like we still need that. Yes. Yes, we are doing our best to establish that as a region, Fraser. And with your help through these the tribal summits and this public outreach meeting, but certainly other guidance is always welcome. We do feel like we're on a good path, especially with the pretty minimal minimum requirements we're talking about, which is a letter from the tribal council. Again, the recommendations that we make are to our board members. Certainly the state board and the federal EPA have to approve those basin plan amendments if they are approved by our board. But our board is the first process, really, formal process that we go through with basin planning amendments. And so, when we develop processes like that, we are in communication with our board to ensure that we're going down a road that isn't the wrong one, right? We're establishing a process that we're pretty confident we can make work. So we feel really good about the process that we've started here, but certainly are always ready for new ideas or interpretation of what the regulations might mean in real life. Oh, sorry, Fraser, I just saw your please ignore my last question. Let's see here. Sherry, can you discuss the tribal technical advisor or tribal advisory committee and how to request to be part of a regional or statewide TAC? Sherry, we are still in the process of discussing what that looks like. We got some input at the March 18th Tribal Summit, suggesting a very loose, very inclusive organization that would include the entire Bay Delta watershed, and then one for the entire Tulare Lake Basin watershed. And then in the March 25th Tribal Summit, we received input from someone saying, oh my gosh, there's no way that my input can be meaningful in a big group like that. We need them much more local, much more smaller scale. We want to meet in person, a bunch of other considerations. And so actually, this is a great opportunity for me to plug, if you have time on June 17th or 18th, our information presentation to our board will include some options about what the Tribal Advisory Committee should look like. we'll be asking our board for their opinion, and I'm sure they will be very interested to hear from tribes about what tribes think about the Tribal Advisory Committee and what that should look like for most effective and meaningful participation to happen. So please do plan on attending the June 17th, 18th board meeting for the Central Valley Water Board. Again, get on our LIRIS listservs to make sure that you receive information about this process. We'll make sure to always send information out to our tribal beneficial uses listserv, which you can get on via our webpage on tribal beneficial uses. But we also make sure to send this information out to those who are on our basin planning listservs for the Tulare Lake and Central Valley basin plans, as well as I think we did the Mercury TMDL, the Delta Mercury TMDL listserv as well, knowing that those folks would be interested in the process too. So yeah, definitely. Let's see. Yes, spring RTAC meeting right now. We heard, unfortunately, they were overlapping, but hopefully you're not hearing brand new information here if you attended the tribal summits in March. This definitely is informed by the conversations that we had at those tribal summits. So I don't see any other written questions. Jean, I haven't seen any hands raised. Anyone have questions that we haven't answered yet?
I don't see any hands raised. You might remind those folks the key sequence. We don't have many phones. Any phone? There's a hand. Fraser, you may unmute.
There we go. Thank you.
Hey, Fraser.
I'm just taking advantage of the lull.
Yes.
So I want to treat the part of what you guys have decided as discretionary. So let's just, for argument's sake, we'll go down that road. And that is that two things. One is that we can't do Tsub in a timely fashion. And the other is that we can't amend TMDLs, because both of those things seem like a pretty big barrier to one of the certainly toxic pathways for fish use by tribes, and that is, in areas where fish are actually toxic, then it reduces or prohibits the traditional use by tribes. And that's, to marginalize that type of activity through a process doesn't seem like a great idea. And I'm wondering if there's an on-ramp that you could use if you already have a process for cull, to consider having the Tsub process start up, maybe piggyback on cull in 2022 once you've got cull going. And so you can learn from the cull process and engage tribes, and tribes can decide whether or not to be engaged, and then get Tsub going. And so that I'm suggesting strongly that that's, is an important thing to consider. And the other is, since TMDLs are amended to, and polluters obviously have a lot of capacity to push for TMDL amendments, but people on the other side of that don't necessarily have that capacity. But TMDL amendments are allowed and they occur all the time. And so I think it's a good idea to leave that out there as an option, that TMDLs can be amended if cull and Tsub suggest that they should be. And I suspect that for a lot of water bodies that have TMDLs, cull and Tsub will suggest that the TMDL should be amended. So, to put up that barrier before we get there it strikes me as maybe premature, and we should get there and then evaluate what that means. And an amendment to a TMDL doesn't mean necessarily that you go from 1 part per million to 0.1 parts per million mercury, for 1 year to the next, but it does mean that you establish a pathway for how you're going to get there. Thanks.
You don't have to raise your hand, Patrick. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Go ahead, Adam. Patrick.
I'll let Patrick go if he wants to speak.
Yeah. No, and I think I do want to clarify that. I think that certainly we are not saying that that would preclude TMDL amendment. I think that's absolutely an option that's on the table. And I think what you're saying is valid. I think it's one of those issues that kind of consistent with our prioritization through the triennial review, that's really the issue, is that it is very difficult, very time consuming, very expensive to amend a existing TMDL. And so the board has to make that tough decision of whether we want to spend the time and the effort to amend a TMDL where we already have, at least for Mercury, fairly aggressive implementation plans, and redo that TMDL, which in many cases they are still underway right now. So you're kind of fixing something that you're working on already, or whether you want to expend those limited resources in areas where we could adopt a new tribal beneficial use and get the work underway to start something else in a new area. If resources were no issue, I think absolutely, we would be investigating redoing existing TMDLs on the basis of the new objectives for coal, Tsub, et cetera. But I think given the fact that we have extraordinarily limited resources in this area, I think the board generally says, let's take a look at those water bodies that are unaddressed by TMDLs or unaddressed or do not have tribal beneficial use designations. Issues haven't been looked into, and expend those resources there. But again, I don't want to say as a blanket statement that the board wouldn't be doing that. It's just something we'd be considering along with all the other issues that the board is tackling.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, I think what's being proposed here is a process to quickly get information and make some beneficial use designations with in a sense we're looking at information that would come in very quickly, so we could amend the basin plan. And I think what I was trying to get at is that the information needed to do new water quality objectives or amend a TMDL would be much more in depth, and we're not closing the door on that. But what I think as part of this process is this could be the beginning of that in getting information for stages of getting that done. But the information bar would be much higher to make those changes than it is to do what Elizabeth's proposing here, as getting the cultural designations and then learning, getting a template in place. And we're also, I believe, proposing to initiate that Tsub information gathering just as was suggested. So I think all really good ideas and certainly part of the process. But this first set, I think, is a really it's Elizabeth's proposing a very, very quick timetable here.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And thank you for your question, Fraser. Appreciate, Patrick, that you and Adam are both here to help out with that. And Fraser, that you're here to advocate for the process. We are proposing a quick process, and part of that is that I don't think anybody can deny that we have a cultural moment right here that's happening right now, whereby tribal rights and sovereignty are being recognized in a way that, again, they have not been in the past. And so we want to be sure that we get some successes under our belt in the near term to really, again, provide a template for what success should look like, as well as provide tribes with the response that they've been waiting for what is it now, 400 years, right? Recognition of tribal rights and sovereignty. So we are prioritizing early success, and I admit and embrace that wholeheartedly. I see a note here from Sherry. Okay, Sherry, I saw, yeah, this is your question from earlier in the process. So our process to include tribes in the planning process is happening right now. So we had tribal summits. We have solicited input from tribes. We worked with those tribes who were very closely involved with our triennial review process, actually in developing this proposed process. And so our planning process very much is including tribal input as we move forward. In the actual project. So once we start the project, which I guess includes a little bit of planning early on as far as what is included in the recommendations to the board for the Basin Plan Amendment, that will be the formal AB 52 consultation. That will begin that process. One of the questions we had for our legal counsel in this process is, when is formal AB 52 consultation expected? And, you know, of course, the answer is always more is better. But we want to make sure that we're doing it at the right time. And what it came down to for this process is that the right time is soliciting tribal interest in participating early on. So again, that sort of July, August timeline. And then making sure that recommendations for designation are not an issue for tribes that are not part of that request. So again, when we have actual waterways that are being proposed for designation, that'll be our second round of AB 52 consultation. So yeah, I see your comment about consultation before the plan is fully developed. We don't, you know, this is very much an in-progress effort. So certainly we welcome tribal input at this point. But the AB 52 consultation is very intimately tied to the CEQA process. And so we don't actually begin CEQA, that formal process, until we actually have a project, which of course we don't have until the process is sort of complete and reviewed by a board and approved. So I don't know, Patrick or Adam, if you have comments on that.
Yeah, I think I just want to clarify a little bit. What we have right now is we're in the phase of pre-planning, really, and we've done some tribal outreach meetings. We're doing this meeting and kind of throwing out ideas. And Elizabeth's come up with a kind of proposal for a timeline and some things there too. But we don't, until we've kind of got to a certain point, and I think we're getting very close to that point now, where we actually have a kind of a real concrete proposed project that's and we're going to tie, what we want to do is tie that, kind of like Elizabeth said, to the CEQA process. This is not a project that's been fully approved by our board. This is not a project that is actually starting. This is a project that we're getting going and beginning the process on going to that approval. So we're not even at that phase yet of having something to something solid here to begin with. And I think that's where we're at right now. When we go and we start the CEQA scoping process, I think that's when we're at a point where it's like, okay, we have enough information now. We've done enough pre-project meetings and understanding what people's thoughts are. And now we can actually throw a project out there that we want to get, to start in this process. So I just want to be clear. We don't have, at this point, our board has not approved anything. And we won't be at our board for approval of a project until I believe in 2022 is the hope at this point from Elizabeth. We will have an information item in June. At that point, there'll be no board decision though. It'll be discussions and an update on what Elizabeth and Meredith, myself, Patrick have learned, and kind of, hey, here's where we're at, and here's where we want to go. And that's, so the tribal consultation will follow, I think, very soon. I don't have the time schedule in front of my face, but really, I think we're very close to initiating kind of that CEQA scoping tribal consultation process in the very near future, this summer, right, Elizabeth?
That's right, Adam.
Okay.
Thank you. Questions, thoughts, protestations, ideas? Looks like, Jean, could you unmute Fraser? Oh, maybe I can.
Thanks.
Feel free to share. Hey.
I noticed that our audience is fairly diverse, and there's representatives from different interests in the eventual TMDL process. And so I wanted to figure out, and this is because tribes are present, again, going back to what are the standards going to be if, for example, a call designation includes a traditional use of fish, which relies on fish being present, which means water quality would have to improve for fish to be present in order to provide that traditional cultural use. So that's just posing that case, which is easily defensible. When that comes up against, say, nitrogen discharge or low oxygen conditions or other conditions like that, which, dischargers are in ag are primarily responsible for, then it seems like we would be setting up exactly the kind of contrasting situation which the board is, created for. And the tribes, I don't think have had to go through something like this before. So how can they best prepare information for that, to make that argument? And this is just going after cull, the low-hanging fruit, let alone Tsub. To just say that they just need to send a letter, it seems like it's almost setting up the Basin plan will say that cull is a designated use, but it won't really result in any changes to water quality. Do you see what I'm saying? That I want to really
Absolutely.
test here, how are we going to get to the point where the conditions are actually improved? Is that through new permits? Is that through revised TMDLs? Is that through discharge changes in discharge requirements, things like that? I mean, those are the actions that the board can implement to actually improve the cull and Tsub beneficial uses. So how do we get there? What's the pathway to that? Because this seems like it may not get us there, certainly in this decade.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I think that is, I think you heard our comments, or if you didn't, the Central Valley Water Board's comments to the state board when the tribal beneficial uses were adopted was really to try and temper expectations. There's certainly a victory gained the day that those beneficial uses were adopted. But the lion's share of the work, the technical work, the engineering report, the type of permits that need to be revised, the planning work that goes into adopting a TMDL, the literally millions of dollars in CEQA work that the board does not have available to do that type of planning exercise and adoption of regulations. None of that was provided when the tribal beneficial uses were adopted. So we're trying the best we can with the resources that we have at our disposal to honor the intent of the State Water Board to actually have meaningful improvements in water quality in water bodies that have significance to tribes across the region. But I think that what you're hearing, and even kind of to my comment earlier about the revision of TMDLs, that's exactly kind of where we have to make some tough calls, or the board has to make some tough calls about what the priorities are going to be, because this is really, and Meredith can kind of second on that, an extraordinarily resource limited program statewide. So the effort in kind of putting something together to even do the science work necessary to support, to make those calls about what water quality objectives are necessary to support a tribal cultural beneficial use is going to be very, very difficult. And it's a long process. You know, Fraser, I know you worked extensively on the Delta methylmercury TMDL, and it was an incredibly complicated process. Certainly it will be less complicated for other water bodies in kind of developing proposals and implementation plans to get to achieve the water quality necessary to support tribal beneficial uses. But I think it in some ways it's almost more complicated in that, you know, certainly what we're hearing from tribes, and I won't say universally, but from a lot of tribes, is that cultural beneficial uses, Tsub beneficial uses include multiple water quality parameters that aren't necessarily covered by existing water quality objectives. And the development of water quality objective is really one of the most complex scientific undertakings that the regional board has. So if the tribe is saying, look, we have specific bacterial objectives that may be different than the drinking water objectives, how do we craft a bacterial objective that satisfies that criteria? How do we address, you know, in these areas, navigate between the flow, which we have very little control over, temperature, which we're having less and less control over due to catastrophic climate change conditions, and marry that up with, you know, nutrients that we do have some control over to prevent things like eutrophication, HABs, and things of that nature. You know, there's a tremendous amount of hard work that needs to go into these things. So, but I do think that the key decision point that kicks that process off is the recognition and the designation of the tribal beneficial uses at the front end. But I don't want to, you know, kind of overcommit the board and say, you know, once you have a tribal beneficial use designation to a water body, everything else is going to fall into place neat and orderly after that. That is actually when an incredible amount of work needs to be done to make sure that we have our hands around all of the controllable factors to make water quality achievable within that water body. And, you know, there's always looming in the background the concept that there are uncontrollable factors. And I say not, you know, uncontrollable factors as factors that cannot be influenced by human decisions, but rather factors that the Central Valley Water Board does not have authority over. Operation of dams, you know, mercury deposition from the atmosphere due to operation of Chinese power plants, things like that are unbelievably complicated to sort out. And those in and of themselves may make the attainment of, you know, say the mercury objectives or other objectives incredibly difficult. And in that case, we then get into a subsequent discussion with US EPA about highest and best use for those water bodies, what is attainable, what is, you know, even with a tribal beneficial use designation, what are the standards to achieve the highest and best use of that water body? So, you know, I think that's going into way too much depth, Fraser, but I know you're familiar with the process. And that's really the kind of really tough question that the board will be asking. But I don't want to de-emphasize the fact that the first step in this journey, or I suppose the second step after the state board has adopted the tribal beneficial uses. But the second step, the step that the regional board would take would be to assign those beneficial uses to water bodies, to engage with tribes and understand what their tribal uses are, what their cultural practices are, open the doors as wide as possible to not just technical, you know, justifications, but to anecdotes, to tribal histories, things of that nature, which the board is not used to dealing with. I mean, we're used to dealing with what are the hard numbers, what you sunk a well in 1975. What's the water quality objective? Let's figure out what the groundwater beneficial use is, you know, based on that water quality parameter. Here, we're going to be engaging with the tribes to hear from them what has special meaning to them, you know, and honoring their kind of status as the you know, original inhabitants of California, and really, you know, this being all their land that we kind of sit upon. I know there was an acknowledgement during one of the tribal summits of the tool to figure out, you know, where you sit on a particular day, which tribal cultural land you used to occupy. And I think it's a worthwhile exercise to anybody regulated by the board to go through an acknowledgement of who came here first. But I'm rambling at this stage. I don't want to take the mic away from Elizabeth and let her facilitate the next steps, but just some comments, Fraser, as what the process truly entails after those tribal beneficial uses are assigned to a water body.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Appreciate that. Sherry couldn't raise her hand, but would like to speak. So Sherry, I am going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, I'm super quick. So seeing these processes, there's something to think about, right? Is we're in spring, we're moving into a fire season, right? The same individuals that work on fish, and for most tribes, are the same people working on fire and FEMA. But at the same time, you know, if we open this process up in June, I'm not sure that they'll be ready to move to get what you need within 2 or 3 months. But if we open up the process now, it's spring, they have a little bit of time. You know, it takes things twice as long right now because of the way that we have our new fire regime, right? So that is precisely why having a tribal advisory committee that's that's both local and then the wider statewide for tribes to be able to provide you with feedback on the plan. I'm just recommending you do it early and you don't wait, that's all. Because I see a problem in our schedule when it comes to.
That's a really good point, Sherry. And actually, water board staff have been pulled away to respond to catastrophic wildfire as well. So I think that's a really good thing to remind all of us of, that season is so long now. So yeah,
so maybe make the process pieces longer too, and but with the statement of we're making it long purposefully so that you can get started early, gathering your information and your data that you'll need, so you're not scrambling at the end of the summer.
Totally. And we certainly could extend, you know, in my mind, I was just thinking November, December would give a good, 5-6 months. But certainly we could extend that to February, March also, and make things, not due until early in 2022. That's not the end of the world. So thank you for that input, Sherry. No problem. Other questions or suggestions, things that we're not thinking about, such as catastrophic wildfire? Things you're worried about? I don't see any hands. I don't see anybody unmuting. Actually, I shouldn't say that. On my second screen, I have M. Nazaroff, who is unmuted. Did you have a question? I don't want to assume. Maybe not.
No, that person does not appear to have audio, only a camera.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate you. Question in the chat. How can non-tribal interested parties be informed about which waters the tribes have or have not recommended? So good question, Michael. We will, once we, I don't know what the timing will be for this, so I shouldn't commit to it. So I would say after we have our second formal AB 52 consultation with the tribes, once we start getting the staff report together, I would say that would probably be a reasonable time for us to let our listservs know what waterways are being put forward. But also, I would say too, if you are interested in the process, you can certainly always reach out to me or to Meredith or Adam with your questions or curiosity. If there's a waterway in particular that you're interested to, we can, mark that down and just let you know if that has been identified by any tribes. Further, if you have a relationship with the tribes on the waterway or in the watershed you're interested in, getting in touch with them would maybe also be appropriate, and asking them if they, need help or support in that way. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Michael, but please feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email in the chat. I promise you I'm very prompt on email, and we'll get back to you right away. We have a request in the chat from Fraser to hear from Debbie of the Central Valley Clean Water Association. Debbie, I don't know if you are interested in speaking, but I will invite you to unmute.
Well, thank you. Fraser, I was curious as to what you were asking for. I think we're obviously, I can give you a little bit of background. We're obviously interested in this process, have been interested in it throughout, not only in this, but through the Mercury provisions. We are really supportive of stakeholder processes where multiple groups and multiple interests can have an opportunity to talk and look for water quality solutions collaboratively that are practicable and implementable, and really meet the needs of not only tribes, but everybody. And so, Fraser, is there something particular that you were wondering?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I should have been more clear. Yeah, I was just wondering from a discharger perspective, what do you think are going to be some of the concerns with the call or Tsub?
Well, I think, you know, obviously attainability and what we can do and what makes sense to do is obviously in the time frame, because there are impacts, and as was discussed, I think you have to start from that we all, whether it's no matter where we go from our industry. And for those that don't know me, my name is Debbie Webster. I'm with the Central Valley Clean Water Association. I guess I could turn on my I can't start my video, so that's okay, not a problem.
Go ahead. You may be able to do it now. We had it disabled just in case people were Zoom bombing. So
okay, there we go. I'm not.
There you go.
Okay, no problem. I'm with the Central Valley Clean Water Association, and we represent a lot of the wastewater treatment plants in the Central Valley. But I think one of the things that's really important to know is that really, even though we're considered a discharger, we are people who take waste from not only the population and people, but we turn it into a resource, and providing clean water and protecting the environment are very important, but we also balance that with the importance of being able to actually do it, being able to afford to be able to do it, and making sure that when we do water quality investments, we see results on that. So looking at options for doing that is really important. And I think that is going to be part of our concerns. We're going to want to look and say, hey, are we going to get water quality benefits for doing this? Are we going to actually protect the use? Is that needed? And I appreciate we like to partner with the regional board and state board and other stakeholders. So I think you'll see us engaged throughout the process.
Thanks for being game, Debbie. Fraser, did that answer your questions?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was putting Debbie on the spot because I had mentioned discharges and so, but thanks for being game to be put on the spot, Debbie. I do hope that we can figure something out, but as you probably can anticipate, there's going to be some bumps with any attempts to reduce, change water quality objectives and so forth. But thank you.
Thanks, Fraser. Thanks, Debbie. Fraser, I thought you meant there would be bumps with our process, which that will probably also be the case. Stephanie, I see that you have your video on. I didn't want to assume, but if you would like to ask a question, you are welcome to do so. I'm trying to okay.
I didn't have a question. I just heard that they allowed us to turn the video back on, so I figured I'd show my face.
Thank you. It is really nice to see faces. I appreciate you. That's great. Other questions or thoughts? Appreciate, Debbie, your comments on balance. Certainly that's something that is part of the mission of the Water Board and something that we do keep in mind with any of these changes. Other thoughts on any of this? Pretty quiet out there.
Reminder, you could raise your hand on the bottom, or well, I don't think anybody else is calling in. So yeah, within the Zoom client, you could just raise your hand.
Thanks, Bob. All right, well, I mean, we certainly can end early and give everybody a half hour of uncommitted time, which is so precious. But I don't want to cut anyone off either. Sharing the PowerPoint, yes, Sherry, we absolutely will. I will get that out via our LIRIS lists. looks like we have a hand, but I also see that Chair Longley and Board Member Bradford have unmuted, and we would very much appreciate hearing from both of you. Would you like to cede the floor initially to Diana for her comment?
Certainly, go ahead and let Diana speak.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair Longley. Diana, I think I just asked you to unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my internet is terrible, so I'm gonna stay with my video off. I'm just hoping the audio goes through. I guess one thing I'm thinking about that might make this process easier for tribes, and I don't know what your resources are, is just sort of some materials we can take to our tribal community to present this and to get feedback from the community. You know, a lot of us work for, you know, planning or environmental offices, and we're really used to acronyms and dealing with boards and things like that. But if I go out to the and hold a community meeting and say, we're going to establish Tsub and call for the TBUs, like no one's going to come, right? So maybe just some really plain speak sort of things, to talking points to take back would be really helpful for tribal staff who already wear a ton of hats, and interpreting another piece of language to the tribal community can be really difficult. So just any resources that you guys could sort of distribute that we could start taking into the communities for feedback would be really invaluable.
Absolutely. Diana, that's such a good idea. I'm so sorry we didn't think about it, but really appreciate you sharing that need. Yeah, we can absolutely do that. And I think that I have your email address. We have a fact sheet right now. I'm going to send it your way after this meeting to see how you feel about its readability by laypersons. And we can work from there to develop something that's more interesting to read and share. So thank you. Board Chair Longley, would you like to say a bit?
Well, I enjoy the participation today by folks, and we're going to be doing more outreach, obviously, a lot of outreach in the future, and certainly encourage other folks that you know that would benefit by attending these meetings. And I might point out, when they benefit, we benefit also. So it is very important that we work to extend the message that we're getting out. The consultation issue, I understand that at some point, I suspect we're going to have timelines established that will give you some idea, even though they might be somewhat, excuse me, of a guess. They'll give you some idea of where we're going with this. And I have full faith that you will be consulted as early as we can. That's a very important part of the outreach. That's why we do it. It cannot be a one-way conversation. It has to be a two-way conversation. Once again, thank you for your participation today. And I certainly thank you and Elizabeth and the rest of the folks that prepared this and put it together and were part of the program.
Thank you so much, Chair Longley. Board Member Bradford, would you like to say a bit?
Well, I think Carl stole my thunder pretty much. I mean, everybody on the call seemed very engaged. I really appreciated the feedback, especially by some of the very active participants. And I was going to echo really what Diana brought up. This process is so complex. I learn a little bit more each time I'm on a call, and you know, reviewing your PowerPoints will help. I'll look forward to seeing those. But a very simplified executive summary of an executive summary with some graphics, I think that'd be helpful for people that are really going to be trying to understand this coming in cold as the process evolves, would be very helpful. And yeah, I want to thank you and Meredith and everybody who's worked to pull this together as well. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate both of your presence here today. Well, I don't see any more hands. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I think we will close the meeting out. I would love to invite our executive officer, Patrick. I don't know if you'd like to say anything else, but we would love your help in closing out.
No, I think you're doing a fantastic job on your own. I truly appreciate the input of everybody. I'll also note, and I think, Elizabeth, this is something that you've raised before, a board certainly appreciates the fact that, particularly for this process, the Zoom format or the Teams format is less than ideal. We have a lot of members of tribal communities that are reluctant to participate in these efforts due to connectivity issues, other issues, and I think we absolutely respect that. So I think, you know, Elizabeth, I know you volunteered to go around the state, you know, making those meetings one by one, but I do think an effort like that is actually well warranted. We are as we kind of engage in this process, we as a board staff want to go out there. I'm sure Carl and Mark are game to come along with us to have these communications in areas where, you know, we can truly get out on the ground and understand and hear from tribal representatives in their own words, in their own terms, in their own backyards, on their own land, what they are trying to protect and what we should share and try and protect. We do that, you know, certainly with dischargers, and I just want to be absolutely clear that it's our intent to further engage when we get down this process. But that said, I do appreciate everybody kind of taking the leap as we have been for the past year and engaging with us on this platform here today. Elizabeth, I want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and Meredith as well for supporting that work. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a long road ahead between the designation of the tribal beneficial uses and meaningful water quality impacts. But just because it is a long road, because there are a lot of technical challenges, we're not shy about taking those on. And I think that's the commitment that you've heard from Carl, Mark, the rest of the board, and you'll continue to hear from the board members as we move forward with this process. I just want to thank everybody for their hard work on this and for attending today, and especially Elizabeth for doing a lot of the legwork to get this group together.
Great, thank you, Patrick. My pleasure. All right. Well, I think we're done. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please do reach out if you have continued questions. We just really appreciate your continued participation in the process. So, and we'll see you next time, maybe in person one of these days soon.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks so much, Bob, for helping us out on this.
You're welcome. I'll wait until a couple more comments, and then I'll save out the chat log for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's awesome.
Nice seeing you, Doc. Nice seeing you, Elizabeth.
I know.
Yeah.
Bob, I'm going to be in tomorrow morning, so if you're in, I'll come say hi.
Will do. Yeah. Thanks, Doc.
I get to meet Mindy tomorrow too. I think she's going to be in. I haven't met her yet too. So.
Really?
Awesome.
All this time, huh? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Very cool.
Yes.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Good night,
Later.
guys.
Bye.